Time. It gnaws. Every second that passes is a bite taken out of your life. And behind the ticking clock is a god. He was once king of a golden age, then overthrown, bound, buried, and feared. His festivals were filled with laughter, but soaked in blood. His worship promised freedom, but delivered control. And while the world forgot his name, his grip only tightened. If you too were once a king or queen of a golden age, check out Pantheon Apparel, our clothing brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot, link in the description. Before Saturn, he was Cronus, and before that, he was just a son, born into a pantheon where fear was inherited. Cronus was the child of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. But this wasn't a family built on love. Uranus feared his own offspring, believed they would rise against him, so he did what tyrants do. He locked them away, deep within Gaia's body, buried alive, forgotten. But Gaia, the mother of all things, refused to be a prison forever. She gave Cronus a weapon, a jagged sickle made of stone, and told him to use it. When Uranus descended to lie with her again, Cronus struck. He castrated his father, severing heaven from earth, and flung the bleeding remains into the sea. From that act, the old king was undone, and Cronus took his throne. He ruled for a time, and perhaps he thought himself free, but Gaia had also given him a prophecy, that one day one of his own children would rise up, just as he had. And so Cronus, now crowned in fear, turned inward. His wife, Rhea, bore his children, one after another, and each time he opened his mouth and swallowed them whole, to trap them inside his body as if time could be paused through brute force. Only Zeus escaped, hidden by Rhea, swapped for a stone wrapped in cloth. Raised in secret, Zeus grew strong, and when the time came, he returned. He cut open Cronus's belly, freed his siblings, and began a war that would shake the heavens. Cronus was defeated, cast down, and bound in chains. The Romans inherited this story, but they weren't content with a defeated god. They repackaged him and gave him a new name, Saturn. They made him gentler, made him useful, a god of sowing, of wealth, of the passage of seasons. He held a sickle still, but now it harvested grain. He still ruled over a bygone age, but now they called it golden. They built him a temple in the heart of Rome and told themselves he was tamed. But he never was. Because Saturn is time, not the neat, mechanical kind measured by clocks, but the older kind, the real kind, the kind you feel when your bones ache, when the leaves rot, when what was once sharp becomes dull. He's the god of endings, of limits, of decline. He doesn't rage, he waits, and sooner or later, everything answers to him. You can change his name, you can soften the edges, you can build temples or tear them down, but Saturn remains, watching, counting, and swallowing everything. Before decay there was peace, before the Iron Age there was gold, and at the heart of that forgotten world stood Saturn. The Romans called it the Golden Age, a time when the world didn't need kings, laws, or war. Saturn walked openly among mortals as a guide. The earth gave without being asked. There was no hunger, no poverty, no punishment. The land bloomed on its own, untouched by tools or toil. Humanity lived in a kind of innocence, effortless. It was harmony through abundance. The people were not ruled because there was no need to rule them. No greed, no envy, no conquest. The sickle in Saturn's hand wasn't a symbol of death yet. It was simply a part of the cycle. He was the god of seed and harvest, of patience and return. Time moved, but gently. Nothing rushed, nothing decayed. But peace rarely survives succession. Eventually, the harmony fractured. Jupiter, his son, rose in defiance. The details vary. Some say Saturn was overthrown in battle, others say he was cast into exile or bound deep beneath the earth. What matters was the outcome. Saturn was gone, and the Golden Age went with him. In his place came a harsher world. The Silver Age introduced seasons and labour. The Bronze Age brought ambition, borders and bloodshed. And then came the Iron Age, our age, defined by greed, violence and struggle. The further humanity drifted from Saturn's rule, the harder existence became. Life no longer flowed, it had to be fought for. Still, the Romans couldn't let him go. Even as their empire grew on conquest and domination, they clung to the memory of a world that didn't need such things. They honoured Saturn as the bringer of wealth, the father of agriculture, the one who had once ruled over a better time. His sickle, once cosmic, was now agrarian. His name remained etched in their calendar, in their rituals, in their myths, but it was never simple nostalgia. Because they knew Saturn had not been destroyed, only buried, and buried gods have a tendency to return. Once a year, Rome surrendered to chaos. The streets erupted in colour and sound. Slaves were treated as equals or even as kings. Masters served their servants. Gambling was legal. Authority was mocked, and Saturn, long buried, was honoured again. This was Saturnalia, a festival of excess, inversion and laughter, held in mid-December as the sun reached its weakest point. It marked the loosening of order, the breaking of rules. Gifts were exchanged. Feasts ran late into the night. People wore strange hats, barked insults, and crowned fools as mock kings. It was joy, but veiled in something older. Because beneath the revelry, Saturn's presence was still felt, and the Romans knew exactly who they were celebrating. It was appeasement, a temporary surrender to a god who had once ruled everything. By turning the world upside down for a few days, the Romans believed they could keep it right side up for the rest of the year. Let the slaves eat first, let the lords dress down, let misrule take the throne, because Saturn remembered what it meant to reign. Even the symbols of the festival held shadows. The pileus, a soft cap of liberty worn by freed slaves, became the icon of Saturnalia. Freedom, yes, but conditional, brief. The laughter was ritual, a controlled inversion to remind everyone what waited beneath the surface. Because Saturn's golden age was never forgotten, but neither was the fear of its return. And so the festival walked a line between celebration and containment, 1 week of chaos in exchange for a year of control. People danced, the chains were loosened, but only for a moment, because Saturn always demands restoration, and once the candles were snuffed out and the wine had dried, the world returned to order, and the god of reversal faded once more into the silence beneath the earth. Before the laughter of Saturnalia, there was the silence of the altar. Long before the age of wine, gift-giving, and carnival masks, Saturn's worship was grim. Beneath the surface of the god of sowing lay something far older, far darker, a hunger for sacrifice. Some of the oldest Roman sources speak of a time when Saturn demanded human lives. According to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, in the early days of the Republic, victims were offered to Saturn and cast into the Tiber River, drowned in rituals meant to preserve the order. It was a grim exchange, blood for stability, death for prosperity. The earliest rites were crude, primal, performed not in temples but in open fields, where the earth drank deep. Even as the Republic evolved, the memory of these sacrifices endured. Later generations replaced the victims with effigies, straw dummies, dressed and named, thrown into the Tiber in their place, a symbolic gesture, but one that preserved the logic of the ritual. Saturn still had to be paid. Rome would later outlaw human sacrifice entirely, By the time of the Empire, such rituals were framed as barbaric, foreign, even un-Roman. But erasure is not exorcism. The rituals had simply been transformed, sanitized. At the center of this uneasy evolution stood the Temple of Saturn, one of the oldest and most revered sanctuaries in the Forum. Beneath its columns sat the Aerarium, the treasury of Rome, the beating heart of the empire's wealth and bureaucracy. All tax revenue, war spoils, and reserves passed through its vaults. It was no accident, then, that this treasury lay under Saturn's domain. He was a god of contracts, debt, and consequence. To sow is to owe, and the Romans knew that prosperity, like grain, had to be harvested with risk. Saturn's temple was both a shrine and a strongbox. It was a place to store gold and to remember that wealth, real wealth, requires a cost. The god who once devoured children now devoured coin, law, and power, and the city thrived because it never forgot what that power was built on. The blood may have been buried, but it was never cleansed. The rituals changed. The price didn't. Across the sea, another god held dominion over fire, time, and fate. The Carthaginians called him Baal Hammon, and to the Romans he looked all too familiar. His throne was the furnace, his altars were alive with flame, and in him the Romans saw the shadow of Saturn. Roman writers accused the Carthaginians of the darkest rites, the sacrifice of children, infants placed in open hands of bronze idols, the bodies consumed by fire, while drums drowned out the sound of the screams. Archaeological evidence from the Tophet of Carthage, burial grounds filled with urns containing the charred remains of infants and small animals, suggest that these accusations were not entirely without truth. Whether every child was truly sacrificed, or some were stillborn and offered in dedication, remains debated. But to the Roman imagination, it was proof of barbarity. Carthage, they claimed, fed its god with fire. Yet there is irony here, because in accusing Carthage, Rome was confronting its own reflection. The Romans remembered well that Saturn, too, had been fed in blood, that in their own earliest days, victims were drowned in the Tiber in his honor. By branding Baal Hammon as monstrous, Rome displaced that darkness onto its enemy. Carthage became the barbarian, while Rome presented itself as civilized, purified, above such things. But the truth lingered. Both gods, both peoples, shared the same shadow. For the Romans, Saturn and Baal Hammon were two names for the same figure. A devourer, a tyrant, a god who demanded sacrifice for stability, and by destroying Carthage, Rome told itself it was destroying that god as well. But Saturn does not die in conquest. He waits, and whether on African soil or Roman stone, his altar is never truly cold. As the empire shifted and Christianity rose, Saturn's place in Rome began to unravel. The old gods were no longer tolerated. They were condemned, rewritten, and cast as demons. And for Saturn, the transition was seamless. To the Christian mind, Saturn was the very image of what a god should not be: cold, merciless, and insatiable. A devourer of his own children, a ruler of false paradise. His sickle, once a tool of harvest, became a symbol of death. The festivals once celebrated in his name were condemned as dangerous excess, relics of pagan corruption. Saturn was no longer a god of seed and cycle. He was a shadow, a devil clothed in stone. In demonology, Saturn's traits lived on. He became the patron of boundaries, prisons, and chains. The god who once governed time now governed confinement. His cruelty, his slowness, his inevitability, all were folded into the Christian vision of the infernal. He was retained as an enemy, feared, but no longer worshipped. Saturn had fallen, but in falling, he became more dangerous. When gods fall, they sink. And Saturn, more than any other, has always belonged to what lies below. Banished from the temples, he did not vanish, but he remained exactly where he wanted to be, beneath systems, beneath structures, beneath everything we mistake for freedom. In astrology, Saturn rules with a closed fist. He governs boundaries, restrictions, discipline, delay. Wherever he sits in the chart, there is weight, the drag of the soul, a lesson that cannot be skipped. In myth, he devoured his children. In the stars, he devours your time. Saturn is the taskmaster, the gatekeeper of karma. You don't argue with him, you endure him. And even that is no guarantee of reward, because Saturn doesn't test to elevate, he tests to remind you of who holds the clock. In alchemy, he appears again in matter. Saturn is lead, the lowest of the materials, heavy, corrupt, cold. It resists change, resists purity, resists light. But alchemy teaches that all transformation begins in darkness. The blackening starts with Saturn. He is the base from which gold might emerge, but he gives no promises. Many remain lead, many never rise. Because Saturn is a wall, and alchemists knew that to make anything of value, you must first face him. Then there is the Kabbalistic tree of life, and its highest boundary, Bina, the Sapphira of structure, form, and limitation. Here, Saturn sits as an architect. Bina is the womb of order, where chaos is caged in understanding, but it is also the Sapphira that borders the void, the edge of comprehension, beyond which lies nothing but unmaking. Saturn here becomes the watcher at the threshold, the being who gives shape to everything, and who ensures nothing escapes its shape. The price of understanding is entrapment. The cost of order is the loss of freedom. In every occult system, Saturn is accepted, grudgingly, fearfully, because he is inevitable. You don't invite him, you meet him, in delay, in loss, in the quiet when nothing moves. Saturn demands results, deadlines, silence, suffering. He is the cold hand in systems we think are neutral, in the laws we think are just, in rules we think we chose. His temples are no longer built in stone, they're built in time, in matter, in thought. And the closer you look, the more you realize we never stopped serving him. He just stopped needing to ask. There is a shape that recurs across civilizations, cold, closed, and absolute. The black cube in Mecca, the Kaaba, is orbited in devotion. In Manhattan, it rotates silently outside towers of steel. In cities and screens, in monuments and machines, this shape repeats. The cube is a commandment, spoken in stone. In esoteric traditions, the black cube is Saturn's signature, a vessel, a cage for spirit, a monument to limitation. It is a structure made holy, order made flesh, 6 sides, 8 corners, 12 edges, fixed and immutable. Every line a law, every surface a silence. It does not need to speak, it just waits. Gnostics saw this structure as the very architecture of the prison world, the material realm, a counterfeit crafted by a false god, the demiurge, Saturn. The black cube becomes his throne, his vault, his dominion. To kneel before it is to accept limitation is all there is. It is to believe that walls define reality, that nothing lies beyond what can be measured. It is surrender. But the cube did not vanish with the old world. It evolved. Today it no longer rises in marble and bronze. It pulses in circuitry and screens. You carry it in your pocket. You stare into it for hours. It watches, it listens, it learns, it remembers. The gods of time and harvest have become software and schedule. The rituals have changed, but not disappeared. We tap, we swipe, we click, we clock in, we consent, without altars, without incense, without question. Not obedience through fear, but through habit. It governs our days through algorithms. It knows when we wake, where we go, what we buy, who we speak to. It tallies our attention, sells our desires, and calls it convenience. Debt, law, time. These are the sacraments now. And they are seamless, invisible, unquestioned. Saturn no longer demands blood. He demands data. He demands time. He demands everything. Slowly. We agreed to this through design, because the cube is elegant, efficient, modern. It organizes, reminds, and in doing so, it reshapes what it means to be free. We believe we are liberated because the doors are glass, but they're still locked. This is no longer mythology. It is architecture, infrastructure, system. The black cube has become the interface of a world we did not build, but now cannot live without. Saturn was never dethroned. He was digitized. And now, as you watch this video on the face of your glowing cube, ask yourself, when was the last time you looked away? He is the end of the path, the last planet the eye can see, the cold ring that marks the boundary of the known. In every age he returns, as God, as king, as system, as the structure that gives shape to life and slowly squeezes it. You can honor him, you can rename him, you can bury him beneath temples or laws or screens, but Saturn doesn't need belief, only time. And time always runs out.